believe Mr. Hill answered the next question first.
We've seen a rise in commodity prices in the last few days for many crops that are grown here in the district, as well as some of the livestock. We're seeing some folks promote fear when it comes to higher food prices, and we're seeing that in some areas. What do you believe the role of Congress is in assuring the American people that we will continue to have an affordable, abundant food supply, and the possibility of, once again, a food versus fuel? Do you believe there can be a winner?
I don't think food versus fuel is a legitimate issue. You know that we still feed what comes out of an ethanol plant to cattle. It's still there. The protein's still in it. So I think that's a red herring. We need to keep ethanol. You kind of alluded to that. We need to, until we've got something better. So one day maybe we can make fuel out of algae. That's the next big hope. Great. When we get there, let's talk about it. In terms of inexpensive food, we'll have some fluctuation in food prices, but we're a long way from getting to a point where people can't afford to buy food. So the market prices are always going to vary some, and there's more capacity in the world to grow food. I mean, you can grow food all over Africa. We just don't do it because it's a place that's generally in some different state of chaos. So there's more capacity to grow food in this world, and we're seeing it all the time. I don't think that we're going to have a big concern there. If we increase trade with China, continue to increase trade with China, and send more of our food overseas, that's a good thing. We want strength in commodity prices as long as it doesn't get to some point where it's crisis high levels. I don't see that happening. I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Congressman Smith.
Nebraska, this is the good news. Nebraska is a major player in food and fuel. Whether it's biofuels, whether it's the livestock, utilizing the byproducts of the biofuels industry, we've come a long way. And unfortunately, there's some information lingering out there that's less than accurate, that paints the picture inaccurately. Unfortunately, the EPA, among other agencies, doesn't get that accurate information. And so actually, they've been very punitive, I think, in the biofuels industry when they came up with this indirect land use scheme that we would have to somehow regulate the production of biofuels here based on the land use in another country. I call that sacrificing our sovereignty as a nation. We should not do that, let alone empower a certain one single agency in the federal government to accomplish that. We can, commodity prices are higher if, for example, livestock prices can support that. Now, what concerns me is cap and trade would accomplish narrower margins, if not zero, when it comes to commodities. And so commodity prices might go up, but the input costs are designed to go up through cap and trade, incidentally. And so the profits for farmers and ranchers would go away, and at the same time, food would become more expensive. That is not a sustainable equation. And when it comes down to actually operating within that, I mean, the Secretary of Agriculture sat before the Agriculture Committee and said, well, farmers will be okay. They can plant trees on marginal acres. Incidentally, reading through the cap and trade bill, that's the only way for a farmer to gain carbon credits is to plant trees on marginal acres. They can't be serious.
Ms. Smith?
Davis.
Davis.
You're having a heck of a time with my name. That's all right.
Yeah, but I'll get it right.
I think we have seen an example recently of where the government, not in our country, but a comparison, has interjected itself in a very negative way in terms of the markets, and that's in Russia. Due to record heat in Russia, wheat crops suffered tremendously. The Russian government then closed all exports of wheat from Russia, and this sent prices soaring. And I mention that because I certainly think part of what makes our country thrive, part of what makes our country unique, is our dedication to capitalism. So as much as it is a concern, wanting to make sure that food remains affordable in this country, let's not forget that the overall picture here is one that we should welcome, and that is the fact that there are fluctuations in the marketplace. We shouldn't rely on the government to step in at times, even if prices are perhaps hurting our pocketbook for the moment. I say that again because let's not lose sight of a very recent and drastic example, like in Russia, where the government did interject itself to the detriment of everyone.
Congressman Smith, so start the next question.
I'm going to try to get two more in here right quick. This is for the Western Nebraska taxpayers. Come January in the next Congress, what will be your first sponsored legislation?
To repeal Obamacare. The sooner we can do that, the better we can do with unemployment, bring down unemployment. When I talk to small manufacturers, or actually any manufacturers in Nebraska, and they say that they don't know how much a new employee is going to cost, mainly because of the health care bill, or the threat of tax increases come January 1st, or several other cap and trade. Sorry to keep going back to cap and trade, but the fact is, there's so much hesitation based on the policies coming out of Washington. The first thing we need to do is repeal the most burdensome one, being the health care bill. And then make sure that the threat of removing the secret ballot from the workplace doesn't continue, or the threat of cap and trade doesn't continue, or the threat of higher taxes does not continue. The options are many. Now, let me be clear. I don't see a government solution in every problem that we face. I spend most of my time in Washington fighting bad bills. Now, I see some good ideas that I want to put forward, whether it's pulling back on some regulation of small hydropower projects, whether it's some other things that I've introduced and been successful, amendments in committee perhaps, in a bipartisan fashion. I'm proud of my record is what it boils down to. But when you look at what can be done, the options are many. But to answer your question very concisely, it's to do what we can to repeal Obamacare. Thank you.
Ms. Rebekah Davis.
Thank you. I should have not given you grief. I'm the youngest of 4 kids. I'm used to being called by various names. My primary reason that brings me here today, the reason I have been campaigning for almost 2 full years now, is that I cannot sit idly by without doing something about campaign finance reform. I look at Congress as it is now, and I see a Congress that has largely been bought and paid, and that includes the incumbent. We should not be satisfied with a world in which corporations and special interest groups play such a domineering role in our elections. Now I'm going to do something kind, and that's say something nice about my other opponent in this race. To my knowledge, I don't believe Dan Hill accepts special interest financing either. That's correct, right? So here you have 2 candidates, and Dan Hill and I, again, to Dan's credit, we've been out there. We've been meeting voters. We've been debating. We've had a very hard time. Some of you know it's been since March that we've been trying to get Adrian Smith to debate. And part of what sets both Dan Hill and I apart is that we are not part of the pay-to-play culture that dominates Washington. My debate has never been about the fact that I have a problem with the Republican incumbent. Far from it. I think one of our greatest legislators in this state was Virginia Smith, a Republican. She was a woman who, if you walked in her doors, it didn't matter as a constituent if you were a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. She took care of whatever your concern was. My hope as a country, and in particular as Nebraska's 3rd Congressional District, is that we all get on board with campaign finance reform, especially in light of the disastrous Supreme Court decision known as Citizens United that has unleashed the floodgates of anonymous donations to third-party groups which can advertise ad nauseum for candidates of their choosing.
Mr. Hill?
Okay. Well, first of all, I guess I have to respond since Rebekah mentioned me. Rebekah and I disagree on probably 90% of everything, but the things she talked about, the money and influence in politics, I agree with that. There's too much money. When you look at the perfectly legal ways that it comes in and goes out, it's just a little bit, it's pretty distasteful. It's not a good thing, and you don't need that kind of money. To go on and answer the question, though, what would be the first sponsored legislation? First, I don't know. Most important, what I would get behind, what I would work toward, what may take a long time to get to, are the biggest issues. Medicare is going to break the bank in this country, all right? And that's not an understatement to say break the bank. We actually, in our lifetimes, the next, I don't know, time-wise, it's hard to gauge, but the next 5, 10, 20 years, we realistically face the federal version, the national version of bankruptcy. And that leads to economic calamity and chaos. We're seeing it in Europe. We're seeing riots in France right now. Great Britain the conservatives there propose cutting across the board cuts, everything the federal government 25%. They're probably going to settle on 19. Are we going to wait until we get that far down the road before we get serious about, our debt situation? It's going to increase by about 50% in 2015. That's the U.S. Treasury. Over the next 20 years, our working age population is cut almost in half. It's going to be tough to grow an economy under those circumstances. So what's first on the list? I got a whole bunch of things on the list, like getting rid of the Congress's pensions and health care. But those are really minor things compared to what happens if our country goes into, we become like Greece. No one can bail us out. The EU can bail out Greece. We can bail out California. There's not enough money in the world to bail out the United States of America. And that's a very, very daunting, big deal. And like I say, right now we've got just about everybody in Congress is keeping their head down, trying to have somebody else bring that up. Well, I'm happy to do it.
Thank you. Ms. Davis was